mostly it's because the top competitors keep putting out all these games, and obviously gaming community is very diverse. Everyone wants, different stuff, but it's that old adage of, they don't build stuff like that anymore, right? So some of that old stuff is always going to have that classic feel, that sort of, I want to go back to that nostalgic time. And a lot of the modern game stores don't dabble in retro anymore, especially, GameStop doesn't touch on it, but you can't walk into a Target and find an N64. So if you want to be able to play some of that older stuff and have like the actual cartridge in your hand, or you're a collector, whatever it may be, like retro games are always going to be relevant in that respect. There are games that are going to be timeless and they'll forever be that way. For me, it was all about, being able to relive what you grew up on, right? You want to be able to play all the old stuff again and again and again. And there's nothing better than actually owning like the games, because there are things where people can like do direct downloads and get, different emulators and whatnot. But when you actually have it and the ability to give that joy to other people, like the people can come in and say like, oh, I played this back when I was like 8 years old. Like that's the stuff you're like, I love to see that when people come in the store and their eyes widen up and they're like, that's the game I remember playing. This game was the best. Or they bring, people my age bringing in their kids going, look at this. Like, you don't even know what this is. And the kid has no idea. But for the adult, like that's that nostalgia factor. There really is no age range. Everyone kind of comes in and, has different things. Because I'll have people my age who come in, they're like, oh, the N64, the Super Nintendo, PlayStation, like that's what I'm about. I get people who are like, could clearly be my parents or above. And they'll come in and they'll see like the Atari and go, the Atari. Like that's, you'll get people of so many different age groups. And then the adults are like showing the younger generation, like this is what I grew up on. This is what I'm about. This is what, you should learn more about this. So I don't really think there is a specific age range. We take almost anything video game related. A lot of stores, you'll see what they do is they'll only take certain things, whatever's selling at the time. Oh, we only take PS4 and Xbox One. We're not about that. It's about having all the gaming options available, as long as it works. But any type of game that's been created, whether it was for like the Sega Nomad, the Magnavox Odyssey, all these different consoles, most people have probably never heard of. But if it's a video game and it plays, we're interested in having that and being able to offer it to anyone, because you could have anyone who could be looking for something as obscure as that. This store specifically, our biggest thing has to be NES games. Like our NES games, we've been getting a lot of those in recently for some reason, which I'm all for. I love the NES. But those games sell really, really well because a lot of people come in and they want to look for those old school. N64 will always do really, really well because that's one of those consoles that like defined, like a generation grew up on N64. So that one always does really well. Like the old school Nintendos are always the most popular though, like NES, Super Nintendo, N64, and GameCube's kind of making a comeback at the moment. In terms of Sony and Xbox, PS2, like surprisingly still does really well. Xbox doesn't really have as much of a retro hold. Nintendo's still kind of the king of the retro market, but then the Sega stuff as well, Dreamcast, Genesis, like those are also going to be big in terms of retro games. See, we talked about nostalgia, like that's going to be a big thing. You want to relive what you played when you were a kid. Another thing is like some of these games, they're timeless. Like you're never going to get tired of playing the original Mario, like running through, side-scroller stuff like that. Another reason is a lot of people are kind of annoyed with where the more modern games have gone, what with games being released and there's nothing but DLC, having to pay more, you pay $60 for a game, but you're going to wind up spending $100 more just to play the full game. And it's like, it wasn't like that back then. Once you got the game, you got the game. That's the entire game right there. And they didn't do this thing, if you wanted to play Super Smash Brothers, you had to unlock every single fighter. Now I can go on the Wii U store and pay $30. Oh, now I got all the fighters. Well, where's the challenge? There's something about the old school games, they didn't adhere to that. It was like you got the game, you got to play, you got to enjoy it. Modern games nowadays, the developers are all about the bottom line. And they're going to do everything possible to milk as much out of you as they can. And I think that's where retro also holds a special place in a lot of people's hearts, especially with where the gaming community is going. Someone came in and brought me Earthbound for the Super Nintendo, complete, still in the box, and with the manual. Now that game could sell up to somewhere between $750 and $1,000. Like, it's kind of crazy, right? Like one old video game has appreciated in value that much, but it's based on rarity, it's based on how popular it is, all these different things. So people want to collect those. You know, the same reason people collect cars. It's the same reason people collect shoes. They want to have the rare, they want to have the stuff that no one's ever seen. They want to have the stuff that's in perfect condition. So with video games, the market has gone crazy because everyone used to buy games, they tear it out the box, they throw it in, it gets all beat up, and you have all these old school games. But when you have like those, the pristine ones, the ones that have never been opened, still in the box, like that's a rare item, and it's going to be ridiculously valuable. So people will collect that to say, I have this, and put it up on their wall and add to their collection. The biggest thing for retro gaming that's going to come of it is, if you notice, like a lot of game developers are doing remasters and remakes because they're understanding that the retro market is a lot larger than they anticipated. Not everyone's going to want the new thing when the new thing is a Call of Duty that plays like the last 12 other Call of Duties. No one's going to be interested in that. What people are going to want is they're going to want to relive those older days, and that's where you've seen things like the online store where you can like download the game to your Wii. But the biggest thing is going to be having the original copy. Like when I got Earthbound for Super Nintendo, I had to go and check and make sure that the circuit board was the original. I had to check and make sure it had the Nintendo imprints on the back, which is stuff most people are like, why would you do that? Because if it's a copy or it's not the original, it doesn't have that value. So what people are going to want is they're going to want to get the original games in their original state, because that's what's going to mean the most overall, especially for collectors, but also for people to be like, you'll have friends over and you'll have that N64 sitting out there, and some guy will be like, hey, let's bust that out, let's play that, and you get the original controllers. There's something magical about being able to play the old school stuff on the old school stuff. Having, you know, a downloaded version is nice, but it's not the same, and you're never going to get that, you know, same feeling. You want to try and recapture the nostalgia that you grew up with. I grew up on Nintendo. I was a Nintendo kid. You can go NES, Super Nintendo, N64. Like, those are going to be your major three that I think you should personally go with. I think the Super Nintendo is going to be the best system for anyone who wants to know retro, because it took everything the original NES did and made it better. And then the N64 was kind of an experimental console going into 3D, because everything up to that point had been mostly 2D. And Super Nintendo was kind of the like, this is where gaming is, we're going to make it better. So I would honestly pick the Super Nintendo. If I had to pick any console, I'd go with that one. I don't think you can go wrong with Super Mario World, obviously a classic. First game that introduced Yoshi, who is one of the greatest game characters in all time, in my opinion. You know, you could also go with any Super Metroid, a classic Super Nintendo game. Link to the Past, the first Zelda title on Super Nintendo. Those three are probably going to be my top picks. Any other Super Nintendo games? Super Mario Kart, the very first Mario Kart game ever created, really shows you how far that game has come. But back then, like, it still was ridiculously fun, even for being, you know, partially 2D, partially 3D. So those would be my picks. Those would be the ones I'd have to go with. Just that there's something about retro games that like it always brings people together, because everyone, you know, in today's society, everyone has played a video game. It has become that mainstream. Back then, it wasn't as mainstream as it is today, but, you know, everyone has always played a different system. So you want to sort of, you know, share with friends. That's the one thing, like online gaming, co-op gaming. Everyone knows about video games at this point. You're not going to meet someone who's going to go, video games, what's that? That's not a thing anymore. So even with the old school games have always been able to bring people together. It's also been able to make people go apart because of fights over games and stuff. But that's one of the magical qualities about them, and that's why I think retro gaming will always be a thing, because there's always going to be that one thing that brings people together. Even if it's like, you know, two friends who grew up playing Super Smash Brothers, they're going to want to buy that Super Smash Brothers, even if it's just to play it for a couple days, because that's to remind them of what brought them together as friends. So that's why retro gaming will always be around.